My wife laughed so loudly that 3 people at the charity table turned to see what I had done wrong, and all I had done was check the time on my father's old watch. Brianna lifted her champagne glass, smiled at the men in tuxedos and the women wearing diamonds bright enough to catch every chandelier in the room, and said, "Luke still wears that cheap little thing like it's a family fortune." For a second, the whole table went quiet in that polished way rich rooms get quiet, not because anyone feels bad, but because everyone is deciding whether laughing is safe. Then Darren Holt laughed first. He was the kind of man who never looked at you directly unless he thought you owned something worth taking. "Sentimental pieces are charming," he said, staring at my wrist. "Usually not useful, but charming." Brianna touched my sleeve as if she were apologizing for me, and that made it worse. The watch was scratched across the glass, the brown leather strap was darker near the buckle from years of wear, and the tiny second hand had not moved since the spring my father died. It was stopped at 8:17. I had tried to have it repaired once, but the man at the little shop in Worcester handed it back and said, "Some things are supposed to remember the minute they broke." So I wore it anyway, not because it made me look successful, not because it impressed anyone, because my father, Richard Harrison, had worn it through every hard year he refused to quit. Brianna knew that. She knew exactly why it mattered, which was why her joke landed where she aimed it. The dinner was being held inside Pierce and Vale Auction House in Boston, a private benefit for historic restoration, the sort of night where every smile had a tax receipt behind it. I had not wanted to come. Brianna had insisted. That was the first strange thing. For years, she had hated that watch. She used to stop me at the front door and say, "Please wear the silver one. We're seeing people tonight." But that evening, while I was tying my shoes, she stood in the bedroom doorway and said, "Actually, wear your father's watch. People should see the real you." I should have heard the blade hidden inside that sentence. Instead, I told myself maybe she was trying to be kind in her own sharp way. Now, sitting under a ceiling painted with gold leaves, I realized kindness had nothing to do with it. Darren leaned back and asked, "So, Luke, if someone offered you real money for that thing, would you finally let it go?" Brianna watched me too closely. The woman beside her, a donor from Beacon Hill, gave a little smile, waiting for my answer like it was part of the entertainment. I looked down at the cracked face, at the frozen 817, at the small triangular scratch under the clasp where my father's thumb used to rub when he was thinking. "It was never about money," I said. Brianna laughed again, softer this time. "That is what people say when they do not know what anything is worth." I felt heat rise in my neck, but I did not give her the reaction she wanted. I just folded my hands near my plate and let the room move on without me. That was when Calvin Pierce walked past our table. Everyone at Pierce and Vale knew Calvin. He had a silver beard, a voice made for million-dollar rooms, and the calm posture of a man who could tell the difference between treasure and junk from 10 feet away. He was speaking to a staff member when his eyes dropped to my wrist. His sentence stopped halfway through. At first, I thought he was offended by the watch too. Then his face changed. Not curious, not amused, pale. He took one step closer, staring at the clasp like he had seen a name on a gravestone. Brianna's fingers tightened around her glass. Calvin looked at me and asked quietly, "Mr. Harrison, did that watch ever leave your possession tonight, at any point?" Calvin's question did not sound like small talk. It sounded like the kind of question a man asks when he already knows the answer could ruin someone's evening. Brianna moved before I could speak. She slid her chair back with a soft scrape and gave Calvin the smile she used whenever she wanted a room to mistake control for charm. "It has been on his wrist all night," she said. "Luke gets dramatic about that thing. Nobody is stealing his little keepsake." Calvin did not smile back. He kept his eyes on me, not her. That was the first time all evening someone had asked me a question and waited for my answer instead of letting Brianna answer for me. "It has not left my wrist," I said. "Why?" Calvin glanced toward the far wall, where black security domes were tucked above the archway leading to the preview rooms. Then he looked at Darren Holt. Darren had stopped laughing. He was studying the ice in his glass like it contained an escape route. "I may need to verify something," Calvin said. Nothing alarming, but everything about his face said it was alarming. Brianna put her hand over my wrist. Not gently, Her thumb pressed the cracked face of the watch against my skin, hiding the frozen hands. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We are here to support a charity, not turn Luke's garage sale jewelry into a museum emergency." I pulled my wrist back. Her grip released, but her eyes sharpened. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it. Panic. Not embarrassment. Panic. 10 nights earlier, she had stood in our bedroom doorway while I opened the old walnut box where I kept my father's watch. I had planned to wear a plain navy suit and the silver dress watch she preferred. She had said, "No, wear that one." I remembered looking up because I thought I had misheard her. Brianna had spent years treating that watch like a stain on every room she wanted to enter. She once asked me to take it off before dinner with her college friends because, in her words, it made me look like I still changed my own oil. But that night she had softened her voice and said, "Maybe I have been unfair. It matters to you. We're at Friday." At the time, I wanted to believe there was still a version of our marriage where a small apology could be real. Now Calvin was staring at the same watch like it had walked out of a locked file, and that memory turned cold. "Mr. Pierce," Darren said, lifting his head, "there is no need to interrupt the dinner program. I am sure any question can wait until after the paddle race." Calvin looked at him. "Can it?" Those two words changed the temperature around our table. Brianna's smile thinned. Darren set his glass down carefully. The donor from Beacon Hill stopped pretending not to listen. A server arrived with salads nobody touched. Calvin leaned closer to me and lowered his voice. "Before you came into the ballroom, did you pass through the North Preview corridor?" "Yes," I said. Brianna wanted to see the historical pieces. "Did anyone photograph the watch there?" I started to say no, then remembered the entrance camera and the young woman in a black blazer who had asked us to pause under a sponsor banner. Brianna had laughed and lifted my hand, telling me my cuff was crooked. She had turned my wrist outward for the camera. At the time, it had felt like another joke. Now it felt placed. Calvin saw the answer on my face. "Stay here," he said. "Please do not remove the watch." He walked away fast, not toward the stage, but toward a side door marked staff and verification. Brianna leaned in so close her perfume covered the smell of wine and dressing. "Do not make this weird," she whispered. "For once, let the night be bigger than your feelings." But across the room, I saw Calvin stop at a registration desk, open a black catalog, and freeze on a page where the numbers jumped from lot 216 to lot 218. I kept watching Calvin through the crowd because the longer he stayed at that registration desk, the more Brianna tried to pull my attention back to the table. She asked whether I wanted another drink. She asked if my mother still kept old receipts in shoeboxes. She asked anything except why the auctioneer had just opened a catalog and gone still. That was how I knew the missing page mattered. People who have nothing to hide let silence breathe. Brianna filled it with noise. Darren stood up first. "I should check on a client," he said, pushing his chair in too neatly. He did not walk toward the ballroom exit. He followed the same path Calvin had taken, passing beneath a marble arch marked Private Preview. I waited 3 seconds, then rose. Brianna caught my sleeve. "Sit down, Luke." Her voice was low now, stripped of all dinner table sweetness. "You do not belong back there." That sentence landed differently than the joke had. The joke had been meant for other people. This was for me. It was not contempt. It was fear wearing contempt's clothes. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at the watch on my wrist. For the first time in years, the old cracked face did not make me feel poor or stubborn or small. It felt like something had been trying to speak, and I'd been too tired to listen. "Then why did you make sure I wore it?" I asked. Brianna's fingers loosened. She opened her mouth, but no answer came out before the applause began near the stage. The auction program was starting. Everyone turned toward the lights, and I used that moment to step away. The North Preview corridor was cooler than the ballroom, lined with glass cases and velvet ropes. "Painting hung benet na dolam." A grandfather clock ticked behind a locked panel. At the end of the hall, Darren was standing with a woman at the registration counter, speaking fast enough that his calm voice lost its polish. Calvin had the black catalog open between them. When I came closer, I saw the gap myself. Lot 216 was a silver tea service. Lot 218 was a Civil War field desk. Between them, the paper looked untouched, as if Lot 217 had never existed. But tucked under the counter was a thinner insert sheet with a number printed in gray. Darren saw me notice it and slid his palm over the page. "Private lots are not for general review," he said, "especially not sentimental misunderstandings." Calvin shut the catalog on Darren's hand. Not hard, not dramatic, but with enough finality to make the broker move back. "Mr. Harrison has every reason to review anything connected to property on his wrist." Property on his wrist. Not jewelry. Not a keepsake. Property. The word turned my stomach. The woman behind the counter looked from Calvin to me. Her badge read Elise Marrow, Registrar. She seemed nervous, but not surprised. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "the private withdrawal file already has a pending consignor note. It says spousal confirmation will be completed after dinner." "Who is the consignor?" I asked. Nobody answered quickly enough. Calvin looked at Elise. Elise looked at Darren. Darren smiled at me, like we were both trapped in a joke he had written. "Luke," he said, "before you let your imagination run wild, you should understand that estate items often move through families in complicated ways." "Who is the consignor?" I asked again. Elise swallowed and turned the insert sheet around. The line was small, but I could read it clearly. Lot 217, Harrison Founder Watch, consignor Brianna Harrison. For a moment, the corridor sound disappeared. My father's watch had not been laughed at because Brianna thought it was worthless. It had been hidden because someone thought it was worth enough to steal politely. Then Elise pointed to a second line under the file status and said, almost apologetically, "There is also a note saying ownership was abandoned by spouse." My chest tightened because I had not signed anything for her at all. Behind me, Brianna's voice cut through the hallway. "Luke, tell them what you signed last month." Brianna had not walked in the corridor like a woman caught off guard. She arrived with her chin lifted, one hand wrapped around her clutch, and Darren immediately stepped half a pace toward her, as if they had rehearsed where everyone should stand. "Tell them what you signed last month," she said again, louder this time, careful enough for Elise to hear. I looked at her, trying to place the document she meant, and that hesitation was all she needed. "The household inventory update," Brianna said, "after your father's storage unit was cleared. You said I could handle the watch because you did not want to deal with old stuff anymore." The words sounded almost reasonable, which made them dangerous. Reasonable lies are harder to fight in expensive rooms. Calvin did not move. "Mr. Harrison, did you sign a household inventory update?" "I signed a moving receipt," I said slowly, "for 2 boxes of my father's books and a broken desk lamp. Nothing about the watch." Brianna gave a small, sad laugh, the kind people use when they want witnesses to think patience is generosity. "Luke forgets details when emotions are involved." Darren opened his leather folio and pulled out a cream sheet with the Pierce and Vale crest at the top. My stomach dropped before I even read it because the paper looked too clean, too ready. He placed it on the counter facing Calvin. "This is the preliminary acknowledgement we received with the private lot packet," he said. "It references sentimental property surrendered for valuation." I leaned over the page. There was my name at the bottom, Luke Harrison, a signature close enough to make my mouth go dry, but not close enough to be mine. The H leaned backward. Mine never did. My father used to tease me about it when I was a kid, saying a man's first letter should stand up straight, even when he could not. That memory steadied me. "That is not my signature," I said. Brianna's eyes flashed, then softened instantly for the room. "Luke, please. This is exactly why I did not want to embarrass you tonight." "You brought the embarrassment," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but it did not shake. "You served it with dinner." Elise looked down at the document again. Calvin noticed something near the top and tapped the page with one finger. "This form is missing an attachment reference." Darren's polite expression tightened. "Older packet version." "No," Elise said, surprising everyone. "Private consignments over $50,000 require a spouse acknowledgement checklist. The checklist generates a blue barcode on page 2. She turned to Darren. "Where is page 2? Brianna answered before he could. "Why does page 2 matter if Luke already admitted at the table that the watch was not about money?" There it was. The trap finally showed its shape. She had not mocked the watch just to hurt me. She had pushed me to say, in front of donors, brokers, and staff, that it was not about money, so later she could twist those words into proof that I did not value it. Calvin looked at me. What exactly did you say at dinner? I said it was never about money. That is different, Calvin said. Brianna's lips parted. For the first time all night, someone had cut the thread she was trying to sew around my throat. Darren cleared his throat. Intent can be interpreted. Not by you, Calvin said. He reached behind the counter and lifted the gray insert marked Lot 217, and not without the missing checklist. From the ballroom, applause rose as the first public item sold. Out there, people were buying history under warm lights. In the corridor, my own history sat between strangers as a disputed asset. Elise typed quickly into the registrar terminal. Then she stopped. Mr. Pierce, she whispered, the system shows the checklist was uploaded this afternoon from a guest wireless connection. Calvin turned the screen toward me. The uploader name appeared in plain black text. B. Harrison. Then a second field blinked open beneath it, and Brianna reached for the counter too late, before anyone else could read it. The second field was labeled device name, and the letters under it were not Brianna's. They read Holt Private Advisory Laptop. Darren reached for his folio with a speed that made the whole counter shift, but Calvin placed one hand flat over the cream document before he could gather anything. Do not remove another paper from this station, Calvin said. His voice was not loud, yet the command carried farther than shouting would have. Elise pulled her hands away from the keyboard as if the screen had become evidence she was afraid to touch. Brianna recovered first. Darren helped me upload forms because your wireless portal kept rejecting my phone, she said. That is not a crime. Nobody said crime, Calvin answered. I said verification. The difference seemed small, but it changed everything. Verification meant the room no longer belonged to Brianna's performance. It belonged to timestamps, uploads, signatures, and people whose jobs depended on not being charmed into a mistake. Calvin turned to me. Mr. Harrison, I need you to come with me to the verification office. The watch stays on your wrist until compliance photographs it. Brianna stepped between us. Absolutely not. He is overwhelmed, and this is humiliating for our family. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because she had spent the last hour making humiliation public and suddenly cared about privacy when the paperwork started speaking. I can answer for myself, I said. Her face changed again. Not fully, not enough for strangers to catch, but enough for me. The woman who had mocked me at dinner was gone. The woman in front of me was calculating how much of the bridge had already burned. Calvin led us through a frosted glass door into a small office lined with archival boxes and framed authentication certificates. The applause from the ballroom became a muffled pulse behind the wall. Elise came in carrying the black catalog and the gray insert. Darren followed only after Calvin told him he could remain if he sat where the cameras could see his hands. Brianna chose the chair nearest the door. I stayed standing. Margaret Wells, the compliance officer, arrived 2 minutes later with reading glasses hanging from a silver chain and a calmness that made everyone else look guilty by comparison. She did not ask, was upset. She asked for the chain of custody. Elise printed the upload log. The page slid from the printer with a small mechanical sigh. It showed the checklist had been uploaded at 5:42 p.m., 38 minutes before Brianna and I walked through the sponsor entrance. The status line said, Final spouse confirmation pending in person. That means somebody expected Mr. Harrison to confirm after arrival, Margaret said. Brianna folded her arms. Because he agreed to stop being sentimental. No, I said. This time I did not let my voice stay polite. I agreed to attend a dinner. Margaret glanced at me, and for the first time, I felt the room record my words instead of swallowing them. She opened the missing checklist on Elise's screen. Page 2 appeared with a blue barcode and a paragraph titled Voluntary Spousal Release. My name was typed twice. The second time, beside a box that had not yet been checked, it said owner may verbally reaffirm abandonment if written signature is disputed. The phrase made my skin go cold. Brianna had not just needed my wrist on camera. She had needed me tired, embarrassed, and willing to say anything that sounded like I did not care. Darren spoke softly. The language is standard. Margaret looked at him over her glasses. It has not been standard at Pierce and Vale for 6 years. Silence dropped, so suddenly I heard the ticking of a wall clock. Not my watch. The office clock, alive and moving. Margaret scrolled lower, then stopped. "Calvin," she said, "there is an attached witness memorandum." Brianna stood so quickly her chair touched the door. Margaret opened the file before anyone could stop her, and the first sentence began with my name. The rest of the line made Calvin inhale sharply, but he did not read it aloud until Margaret locked the door. Margaret locked the door with a soft click that sounded louder than the applause beyond the wall. Nobody moved. Even Brianna, who had been halfway out of her chair, stopped with one hand on the backrest, as if the room itself had told her to sit down. Calvin read the first sentence again, silently this time, and his expression shifted from concern to something colder. Margaret turned the monitor so I could see it. The file was titled Witness Memorandum Regarding Voluntary Abandonment. Underneath, in neat typed paragraphs, it claimed I had told Brianna and Darren that my father's watch was a burden, that I did not want it included in any future estate discussion, and that I preferred my wife to handle disposal because I was emotionally unfit to manage inherited items. The phrase emotionally unfit stayed on the screen like a stain. I looked at Brianna. "You wrote that about me?" She lifted her chin. "I documented what happened." "When?" Margaret asked. Brianna blinked. Margaret tapped the date line. "This memorandum is dated April 19th. My throat tightened. April 19th was the day after my father's memorial service. I remembered that morning because I had driven home from Worcester with his watch in my jacket pocket, afraid to put it in a box. Brianna had made coffee, touched my shoulder, and said we did not have to decide anything yet. Now her name sat on a document saying I had already given up the one thing I had carried home. Darren leaned forward. "Grief creates confusion. The memorandum was meant to clarify intent, not exploit it." Margaret did not look impressed. "Then why was it uploaded 3 hours before the auction and not 6 weeks ago?" No one answered. Elise pulled up the document properties. "Created today at 4:58 p.m. Modified at 5:39 p.m. Calvin looked at Brianna. "That is minutes before guest check-in." Brianna's face tightened, but she recovered enough to reach for softness. "Luke has been distant for months. I was trying to prevent a scene. I felt something inside me loosen, not because the accusation hurt less, but because it finally sounded familiar enough to name. Every time I disagreed, I was distant. Every time I remembered something differently, I was confused. Every time I kept a boundary, I was making a scene. But here, under fluorescent office lights, her usual language had nowhere to hide. It had to stand beside upload logs and missing pages. Margaret scrolled to the signature block. There were 2 witness lines, Brianna Harrison, Darren Holt, then a third line marked prospective verbal confirmation, left blank. "This was never completed," Margaret said. "Correct," Darren said quickly. "That is why we are here." Calvin turned to me. "Were you asked to verbally confirm anything when you entered tonight?" I thought of the sponsor banner, the young woman asking us to pause, Brianna lifting my wrist, Darren appearing beside the photographer and saying, "Perfect, we can use that." At the time, I had assumed he meant for the charity album. "No," I said, "but they staged a photograph." Brianna exhaled sharply. "A photograph is not staging." "Then why was the checklist waiting for my verbal confirmation?" I asked. She looked away. That small movement gave me more truth than any confession could have. Margaret opened another tab. "There is a pending prompt attached to the guest media station. It appears someone prepared a caption for the entrance photo." Calvin moved closer. Elise read it aloud carefully. "Luke Harrison presenting inherited watch for family-directed valuation." The room seemed to shrink around that sentence. Presenting, not wearing, not attending, presenting. They had taken my wrist, my father's watch, and one sentence from dinner, then arranged them into a story where I had willingly handed over my own history. Margaret picked up the office phone. "I am placing lot 217 under temporary compliance hold until we review the entrance footage." Brianna whispered, "Do not do that." Calvin looked up from the screen. "Why not?" Brianna said nothing, but Darren did. Because the camera does not have audio. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Then we will need the person who wrote the caption to explain it right now. Margaret did not wait for permission from anyone who wanted the truth to stay convenient. She called the media desk, asked for the entrance footage from 6:18 p.m. and told Elise to project it on the compliance monitor. While the file loaded, Brianna stared at the black screen with the blank patience of someone hoping technology would fail before people did. Darren kept his hands folded on his knees, but his right thumb moved against his ring finger over and over. Calvin noticed. So did I. The first frame appeared grainy but clear enough. The north entrance, the sponsor banner, the velvet rope, and Brianna beside me in her green dress. I saw myself walk in looking uncomfortable, one hand near my jacket pocket, not presenting anything to anyone. The young staff photographer lifted her camera. Brianna stepped closer to me, smiling at the lens, then reached across my chest as if fixing my cuff. On the screen, her fingers turned my wrist outward until the face of my father's watch pointed straight at the camera. She held it there for 2 seconds too long. In the office, nobody spoke. The footage continued. Darren entered from the left edge, not by accident, not passing through. He leaned toward the photographer and pointed at my wrist. Then he gave a small nod toward the registration desk. The photographer lowered the camera and looked confused. Brianna laughed on the screen, touching my shoulder as if the whole thing were affectionate. In real life, she looked away from the monitor. That proves nothing, she said. Couples touch each other in photographs. Margaret paused the video. My wrist filled the screen, caught at an angle I had never chosen. It proves Mr. Harrison was not presenting the watch, she said. It proves someone else positioned it for documentation. Calvin rewound 10 seconds and played it again. The second time, I watched my own face. I had not seen in the moment, but the camera had. I looked tired, trusting, like a man trying to survive an evening without disappointing his wife. That hurt more than the papers. The papers were lies. The footage showed how easily I had helped people betray me simply by believing they were only being unkind. Elise checked the media station log. The caption was drafted at 5:51 p.m., she said. Before they arrived, Margaret turned toward Darren. Who drafted it? Darren looked at Brianna. Brianna did not look back. That silence answered something, but not enough. Margaret asked Elise to open the photographer's assignment notes. A small window appeared with 3 bullet points. Capture donor arrivals. Highlight historic jewelry. Confirm Harrison wristwatch shot with D. Holt. I read the last line twice. My name was not there. My consent was not there. Only the object, the shot, and Darren. Calvin rubbed a hand over his jaw. Mr. Holt, why would my staff receive that instruction from you? Darren's voice was thin, because Brianna said the family wanted a clean record for valuation. The family? I asked. He shifted in his chair. Your household. That word made something in me settle into place. Not heal, not forgive, settle. For years, Brianna had used our marriage like a room where she could move the furniture and then tell me I had misplaced it. Now the room had cameras. Margaret saved the clip to a protected file, then printed the assignment notes. She placed both beside the fake memorandum and the missing page 2 checklist. The stack was growing, but Brianna was shrinking beside it. Still, she was not done. Even if the photo was planned, she said, Luke still never cared about the watch as an asset. He said so in front of everyone. Calvin looked at me. There may be one way to settle whether this is the same watch listed in Lot 217 beyond the photograph. He pointed to the clasp. Mr. Harrison, has anyone ever opened the back assembly in your presence? I shook my head. Calvin reached for a magnifying loupe. I turned toward her because that sounded less like hope than practiced, dangerous knowledge. Brianna whispered, almost to herself, they will not find it. Calvin's magnifying loupe hovered above the clasp, but he did not touch the watch yet. He looked at Margaret first. Photographs before inspection. Margaret nodded, and Elise brought over a small evidence tray lined with gray felt. I placed my wrist above it, but my fingers would not unclasp the strap. For 30 years, that watch had belonged to my father. For 6 weeks, it had been the only part of him I could still carry into rooms where nobody knew his name. Now, strangers were asking me to open it because my wife had tried to turn grief into paperwork. Calvin seemed to understand. "You can do it yourself," he said. "I only need to look." I unbuckled the worn leather slowly. The watch felt heavier once it left my skin. Brianna watched every movement, not with sorrow, not even anger. She watched like a person waiting for a safe to stay locked. Calvin angled the loop toward the underside of the clasp. Nothing appeared at first except scratches, dust, and the dull shine of old metal. Darren breathed out, almost too soon. Then Calvin changed the light. A small row of characters surfaced near the hinge, so fine I would have missed it forever. Calvin read them once under his breath, then again louder. RH-817-04. The office went still. 817. The same time frozen on the face. My father's initials. My chest tightened so sharply that I had to grip the edge of the table. Brianna whispered, "That does not mean anything." But her voice was too quick. Margaret was already moving. "Archive terminal," she said. Elise opened a secure database marked Founder Collection Records. Calvin typed the code. For 3 seconds, the little spinning wheel on the screen felt like the whole room holding its breath. Then the record appeared. Richard Harrison, custodian and original registered owner. Service number RH-817-04. Object category, prototype wristwatch. Transfer restrictions, direct air verification required. Not spouse, transferable, without owner interview. The words did not make me rich. They made me real. The watch had not just been my father's favorite thing. It was registered proof that his name belonged to a Founder Collection Pierce and Vale had handled decades earlier. Brianna had not understood the whole object. She had seen enough to smell money, but not enough to know where the truth was hidden. Calvin opened the private Lot 217 image file beside the archive record. Brianna's packet showed the face of the watch, the cracked glass, even the frozen hands. But there was no class photograph, no service number, no identification, no Richard Harrison repair card. Darren's face lost every practiced line of confidence. Margaret printed the archive match and placed it on top of the other documents. "This consignment file is incomplete and materially misleading," she said. Brianna stood. "Luke can still approve it. He is here. He can say he wants me to handle it." Everyone looked at me. That was the moment she had built the whole evening around. The dinner joke, the camera, the missing page, the caption, the memorandum, all of it had been arranged so that I would be tired enough, embarrassed enough, and lonely enough to let her speak through me one last time. I picked up the watch. The leather was warm from my hand. The face still stopped at 817, but something in the room had started moving again. "No," I said. One word. No explanation for her to twist. No anger for her to display. Just no. Margaret typed into the terminal. The screen changed from pending verification to ownership dispute hold. Calvin looked at Brianna and Darren. Lot 217 is frozen. For the first time that night, Brianna had no sentence ready. Then the office phone rang, and Margaret answered. Her eyes moved to me. "Mr. Harrison," she said, covering the receiver. "The archive room found your father's original repair card. But there is a handwritten note attached, and it is addressed to you." She asked if I wanted it read in the room, with Brianna still standing there too. I did not answer Margaret right away. The question felt too small for what sat behind it. A handwritten note from my father had survived inside an archive room, while my own wife stood 6 feet away from me, waiting to see whether his last words could still be managed like paperwork. Brianna looked at the phone in Margaret's hand and then at me. "Luke, this is private," she said, as if privacy had mattered before the documents began pointing in her direction. Calvin stayed beside the monitor, one hand resting near the frozen Lot 217 screen. Darren had stopped pretending to be helpful. He stared at the floor, where the polished wood reflected the overhead lights in long, pale strips. "Read it," I said. My voice sounded distant to me, but steady. Margaret repeated the request into the phone, then listened. Her expression changed before the words reached us. "It is dated August 17th, 2004, she said. "Attached to a service card for the Harrison prototype watch." 8:17 again. My father had not chosen that number by accident. Margaret read the note carefully. For Luke, when he is old enough to understand this, a thing does not become valuable because powerful people notice it. It becomes valuable when someone refuses to sell the part of himself that remembers who loved him first. The room went quiet in a way the ballroom never had. Not expensive quiet, human quiet. I looked down at the watch in my palm, at the cracked glass and tired strap, and for the first time that night, I did not see damage. I saw my father's hand closing the clasp before work. I saw him waiting in parking lots, fixing leaky faucets, saying little when life cost more than expected. I saw a man who had left me proof, not of wealth, but of belonging. Brianna crossed her arms. That is emotional, not legal. Margaret looked at her. The legal portion is attached. Calvin took the printed repair card from Elise and placed it beside the archive match. The card listed Richard Harrison as custodian, Luke Harrison as direct heir, and one restriction written in bold. No transfer, valuation, or public sale without direct heir interview recorded by Pierce and Vail compliance. Margaret turned the monitor so the status line faced everyone. No interview exists. The consignment cannot proceed. The private lot remains frozen. The abandonment document will be retained for review. Darren finally spoke. This has been a misunderstanding. Calvin did not raise his voice. Then you will have no trouble explaining the missing class photograph, the outdated release language, the drafted caption, and the guest wireless upload. Darren's mouth closed. Brianna looked at me then, really looked, not at the watch, not at what it might bring, but at the man she had expected to fold under a joke. You're going to let them humiliate me over an old watch? She asked. That was when I understood the final trick. Even now, she wanted the room to call her consequence humiliation. I fastened the watch back around my wrist. The leather settled into the mark it had left on my skin all evening. No, I said. I'm letting them record what happened. Margaret printed the compliance hold and slid it toward me. I signed only as present owner, not donor, not seller, not confused spouse. Calvin offered to return me to the ballroom through a side hall. I walked that way because I wanted air, not drama. Behind me, I heard Margaret ask Brianna to remain for a statement. I did not turn around. In the corridor, the auctioneer stopped beside a glass case and handed me a small envelope from the archive. Inside was the original repair card, my father's note, and a faded photograph of him wearing the watch at 8:17 p.m., smiling like he knew time could break and still keep faith. Outside, Boston was cold enough to make my breath visible. I stood on the steps, touched the cracked glass once, and realized Brianna had been wrong about the cheapest thing in that room. It was never the watch she tried hardest to price.